Welcome to the WastED webinar, and thanks very much for coming to episode 2. I'm going to do some quick housekeeping items as we start, and then we'll introduce Julia and get on to a very exciting discussion around food security and how it relates to food waste. So the WastED webinar is our monthly webinar. Last month we chatted with Tamasen from the Edmonton Food Bank. That episode is on YouTube now if you want to go check it out. And this month we are talking with Julia Tran from the Multicultural Health Brokers. Very excited. We are in conversation with all these different food-related organizations across the city, talking about food waste on a regular basis, because one of the values of Leftovers is collaboration. And we wanted to surface those conversations and bring them into the public sphere so that we can all think about these and address these as a community. On that note, in joining this webinar, you are part of this community if you are not already, and we'd love to know who is here, and we'd love for you to know who is here. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat, that would be fantastic. If you are representing another service agency, if you are another food rescue organization, if you are a passionate individual, a Leftovers volunteer, we'd love to know who's here, and introduce yourselves to each other in addition to us. A couple of quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and we will not be posting your videos. We found a way to post the recording without including anybody's faces other than myself and Julia. So we would be happy to if you kept your video on throughout the video or throughout the webinar. And if you want to take your video off, that is perfectly acceptable as well. It'd be great if you could keep yourself muted, just keep the sound quality up, and otherwise, I think we're good on that. The format of this evening will be, I'll be asking Julia some questions at the beginning, and then later on, we're going to open it up to your questions, because we'd love to know what you want to know about these issues. And if you have questions throughout, you're welcome to put them in the chat box, and another Leftovers teammate will be monitoring the chat box and keeping track of those, and we'll address them in the latter half. And that is all I have for housekeeping. One other quick item that I'd like to recognize and mention is that we are, for the most part, on Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton, which is the traditional land of the Métis, the Dene, the Sioux, the Blackfoot, and many other First Nations, and they continue to inhabit these areas. And when we're talking about issues related to food security and food waste, there's a lot we have to learn in terms of food waste reduction from Indigenous peoples, and there's a lot of work to be done in terms of food security for Indigenous peoples and food sovereignty as well. With that introduction, I would now like to officially invite Julia Tran from the Multicultural Health Brokers. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here today.
So Julia, I would love to start off with a little personal introduction. If you could introduce your role at the Multicultural Health Brokers and what was your journey to getting there?
Sure, that sounds great. So my educational background is actually in social work. And so I first came into touch with the Multicultural Health Brokers through my social work practicum. And then kind of just personally, I've always been guided by my personal experience with my parents coming from Vietnam and being refugees during the Vietnam War. And so a lot of their lived experiences informs what I aspire for in terms of my future, and hope to never take what they've sacrificed and what they've worked so hard for in vain.
Wow, awesome. And now if we go a little bit bigger picture, what is the grocery run? And then even bigger picture, what is the Multicultural Health Brokers and how do they
Sure.
integrate?
That sounds great. So at the Multicultural Health Brokers, more broadly, our fundamental mandate is really to support the socioeconomic inclusion and well-being of ethnocultural families. And then what really makes us unique, though, is that the co-op is actually made up of members of the communities that we serve. And so brokers have a really deep understanding and connection to the communities through their frontline work, through community involvement, through community partnerships, their personal lived experiences, and their relationships that they've developed over time with the families that they served. And so the grocery run is situated within this broader context to support the health and well-being of the families experiencing chronic poverty. And so we partner with the Edmonton Food Bank, as well as yourselves at Leftovers, local food producers, and in doing so, we're able to focus on fruits, vegetables, and culturally relevant pantry staples. And currently we serve about 550 families each week, which is approximately 3,000 people.
Wow. And I remember hearing over the course of the pandemic, your needs drastically increased. Could you talk about that a little in terms of where you were a year ago and how that's changed?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the pandemic, maybe in about February 2020, we had about 100 families accessing the program. So it was about 450 families, 450 individuals every week. And then since the pandemic, we've really seen the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 through housing insecurity, and food insecurity has really deepened. And so we've actually scaled up by fivefold, now serving over 550 families. And with the support of community members, we deliver citywide to help address some of those deepening hardships that have emerged.
Wow. Wow, crazy growth. Amazing. Like
Yeah.
Leftovers has grown 3 times in the past year in Edmonton, and I can imagine 5 times is uh, stressful and exhilarating at the same time. Um, Now, when you're dealing with that many families and that much food, you're definitely primarily focused on the food security aspect, but any organization dealing with food also addresses food waste, and you will also you will have a relationship with food waste in the sourcing of the food as well. Could you talk about how food waste plays into your operations?
Mhm. So with the grocery run, of course, we operate using rescued food as well as food that we purchase. And so it's about 50% of food that we receive through Leftovers as well as through the Edmonton Food Bank. So that's one way in which we deal with food waste, and that we're trying to process and glean anything that's edible and usable from organizations. And so in that way, we're handling the food waste. But as a preventative measure, we also work really closely with yourselves at Leftovers and the food bank to ensure that when we're requesting food donations, we're asking for food items that our community members know how to use and can enjoy. So we're not wasting any of the resources that are really hard to come by. And then, of course, we also work with our brokers and community members to try to build on their knowledge and capacity. So for example, we're sharing information about best before dates and expiry dates. We're also sharing recipes for food items that maybe families aren't so familiar with.
Mm-hmm. That's something that we touched on a bit with Tamasan, is the foods that families aren't familiar with, and especially when you're dealing with um, new immigrants and refugees. How does you also try to provide culturally relevant food. What's that balance like in that play when you are getting these food donated and then also want to provide the foods they're familiar with?
Mm-hmm. Um, so maybe to answer this question, I'll actually go back to one of our recent community engagement sessions that we did through the Persimmon Project. And so I have a quote here that I would really like to share, and it's from the Eritrean community. A woman shared, food is the foundation for human beings. It means life, it means health, it means strength, it means growth. Food has incredible value and honor. And it's just such a powerful articulation and response of what food dignity and food justice means to somebody. And it's really an illustration of how food is much more than just simply filling your stomach.
Hmm.
And I think especially if we are to lean more into this concept of honor, maybe we would actually find addressing food insecurity and that cultural sensitivity component a lot easier. To honor somebody really means to respect them and to listen to them. It means that we have to deepen our knowledge and understanding of food insecurity by learning directly from the people themselves and taking direction from the people themselves. And so when we apply this to culturally honoring approaches or culturally sensitive approaches and practices, it really means leveraging these inherent strengths and assets and wisdoms from the community and pursuing strategies that are in line with the culture and realities of the communities that we serve. So for example, when we're being guided by these insights, it helps us to better leverage our relationships with Leftovers and the Edmonton Food Bank, for example, to identify the specific food items that families would like to receive so that they can cook, consume, and enjoy it. And while we're most certainly not saying the grocery run is fully culturally relevant, we are working to achieve a higher degree by addressing some of the long-standing barriers to food assistance, in addition to the lack of culturally relevant food.
Oh, there's so much to dig into there. I think that one of them, addressing the barriers people have, and I believe the Persimmon Project is part of that. Could you dive into that a little?
Yeah, so the Persimmon Project in a nutshell is really trying to go beyond the grocery run program and looking at emergency food support. So how do we actually leverage and engage the strengths and assets of the families we serve to pursue strategies that are grounded in their realities as well as their socioeconomic well-being. And so I guess building off of that in terms of the grocery run, we've had significant reconfigurations since the beginning of the pandemic, just so that we're responding directly to the changing needs and challenges in the community. So for example, we're now delivering directly to people's homes. So we have a team of about 50 volunteers and brokers and natural helpers. And so natural helpers are people that are from the community, and then brokers are of course from the community as well. So they have specific skills that help to bridge the cultural and linguistic gap.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also apply an alternative eligibility criteria by leveraging the relational work that we do at the co-op. And so we're really applying a very dynamic and holistic understanding of the family's circumstances, whereas traditional screening or intake processes might not be able to do that. For example, they might ask for documents or government ID or income statements, which might not reflect somebody's constantly changing circumstances, whether that is like a sudden change to income or health. And so it also might even exclude people that are without formal status. And then we've also, of course, transitioned to a combination model of rescued food and local food procurement. And so this helps to increase sustainability and security to our families to make sure that each family is accounted for and that they have a certain type of food in their hampers. And then we also don't limit frequency of access to our program, and we don't limit access to our program if you're accessing other supports.
Wow. Wow. It's so in-depth and so relational, so community-minded. And I love that you like the relational context that you have and really getting to know these people and diving into it. Yeah, fantastic. And I think there's a lot that beyond just your work with immigrant refugee families or the cultural families you work with, we can use those same aspects in our governance system and in many different systems in our lives to have solutions that are actually relevant to the communities that we're serving.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon. So moving on to another question. There is a aspect in cultural sensitivity in the work you do, and could you describe a little bit more of how you work with cultural sensitivity in the grocery run?
Mm-hmm. So I think maybe to answer this question, I'd really look to the brokering model and what they call like third space. And so a broker is really someone who's able to navigate two different worlds. And so because a broker comes from the communities that we serve, they have that really strong grounding and understanding of the resettlement challenges, as well as strengths that communities have. And they've gone through it themselves, or they have so much experience navigating this space that they can work really effectively with the family without compromising all the inherent wealth and wisdom that they bring with them. And so when they're navigating mainstream systems, whether that's traditional food assistance programs, they're able to affect change within that system, but also support the family to navigate it successfully. So it's like this mutual process of learning and change that I think is really powerful. And I think that is what is most culturally relevant or sensitive or effective about the co-op. And so when we apply that into the grocery run, what that really looks like is we're constantly, excuse me, in a process of community engagement and leaning into the community to learn what food items would be most helpful for our community members. And when using that information, how can we leverage our purchasing power or our networks to other community partners to be able to connect those families to cost savings or to different supports and resources that would be relevant to our community. And so it's much broader than the grocery run and the foods that we distribute, but it's how do we move beyond food assistance? How do we leverage the skills? How do we use the connections that we have in relation to the skills that exist in the community?
Interesting. there's a part of my mind that is also, so I did an engineering degree, and there's a part of my mind
Oh,
that's thinking that sounds really inefficient. And I think there's a balance between the like the holistic approach and really understanding that deep understanding, having that personal touch and the relationship building, versus the efficiency of like getting a lot of food moved, for example,
mhm.
and sending a lot of food to people. And is that a challenge? And how does that play into the network there?
hmm So I think that's one of the challenges of maybe food rescue itself, like because you're always uncertain of what type of food you're going to receive from our vendors in terms of donations. Like we have absolutely no control over the type or quality or quantity of the food donations that we receive. So that can be really challenging. And on days where we have a lot of food donations to process through, it can slow down the process a little bit, but it's always worth it because it's really important to make sure that families receive food items that are honoring to them, that are useful to them, because in the end, our families are very gracious and are so appreciative of the support that they receive. Actually, from the Eritrean Ethiopian community, at one point we were giving the families so much bread. They told their broker to please slow down on the bread because it's culturally unacceptable and culturally really harmful to them when they have to waste food. And so, how do you
Mhm,
honor that, and
mhm,
how do you make sure
mhm,
that donations or food is being used as effectively as possible? And so, it's about really being in touch with all the different components of this system. And so making sure we're working really closely with yourselves at Leftovers and the food bank, as well as being in touch with our families about understanding, is what we're distributing to you actually helpful, and how can we redirect that in a different way? And so for our grocery and hampers are all standardized. So they'll always include 4 different items that we purchase from our vendors. And then we'll have the food items that we receive through the food bank and Leftovers, and then any kind of miscellaneous items, such as like the really fun stuff that we get through Leftovers, and especially at the Italian Center, we'll always put them on a side table. And one of our brokers have called it like almost kind of like a pantry setup, where they are so familiar with their community members, they know what their family would really appreciate and would be able to use. So that way we're not kind of randomly guessing and just getting rid of the food just to
right.
get rid of it. It's actually
Mhm,
going to somebody who would really, really enjoy it. It's a beautiful treat. And so it's really leveraging that relationship. And so that's something we're actually trying to promote through the Persimmon Project. How do we promote more relational based work? How do we leverage the relationships that exist, not just at the co-op, but other immigrant serving organizations or other
mhm,
community organizations that are applying population-based approaches? Our community organizations know our families and our community members the best, whereas some organizations might be one step removed. How can we work together and coordinate our efforts to make sure that we're really having a strong coordinated effort?
mhm. Could you just briefly explain the population-based approach?
hmm So that would be kind of like when we talk about like culturally relevant programming, for example. It's really looking at what are the unique challenges and barriers that exist within the communities that we serve, and how do we adjust our practice to make sure that it is effective or it aligns with your reality.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, totally. Um, you touched on an interesting piece in the cultural relationship with food waste, and I wonder if, as you're dealing with so many different cultures, how you see the variation in response to food waste. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning that Indigenous peoples have a different relationship with food waste, and I'm sure that's different for many of the organizations you work with, or many of the brokers. And I'm wondering if you, yeah, what patterns you see there.
hmm I most certainly wouldn't say I know a whole lot about that. Actually, the families are teaching me a lot more about food waste and how do you maximize the resources that you have. So,
Mhm,
for example, when in the summer season, like last year, we would be at Prairie Urban Farm or Lady Flower Gardens, and we would have Bhutanese families who would pick what we often think in Western society as weeds. So it was actually lamb's quarter and pig's weed, but they're actually really, really nutritious, and you can buy them in the stores, but it's quite expensive and often unaffordable to families. And so they thought, wow, all this pig's weed and lamb's quarter, we can pick it free for all, and it's fresh and it's basically organic. And so that would be something that's almost like food waste, or even like the ends of the
mhm,
pumpkin leaves or pea shoots. Those are often consumed but thrown away in mainstream use. And so there's a lot to learn from the families that we work with.
mhm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Makes me think of the strengths-based approach that you were talking about. And related to that as well is if you could expand a little on the different growing opportunities that you're cultivating, no pun intended, at the grocery run.
Yeah. So we work with growing opportunities in a variety of ways. So for example, we work with community gardens who are really generous to share some of their excess harvest with us. And then of course, we actually work with a lot of families who were previously skilled farmers. And so in trying to develop a spectrum of food security strategies, the grocery run is a free of cost food support, but we also have those efforts like the Persimmon Project trying to leverage the knowledge and assets and strengths of our families. And so as we move further down the continuum, it's really trying to promote and advance socioeconomic inclusion. So growing would be part of that. And within growing, there's like a whole other spectrum of strategies that if we go at the highest scale of urban agriculture, we're working really closely with Lady Flower Gardens, Prairie Urban Farm, and Northlands to help families access land to be able to transition their skills to a new growing environment, which will hopefully lead to employment opportunities and just the inherent benefits of growing and being outside too are really beneficial. And so
Hmm.
how do we connect our families back to that? And so there will be really exciting things to come with that. And we hope to be piloting a project with Lady Flower Gardens where they've really generously given us zero 0.6 acres. And so that will be soon to come.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, that's exciting. Um, oh, there was a piece I wanted to touch on there, and it's escaping me now. Ah, shoot, almost that. All right, moving on to the next question. Um, I've just been like following all these like tasty leads that you've been dropping, and I've lost track of where we are in our like prepared questions.
No
Um,
worries.
so yeah, this is a good one. What are some of the things that the average person might be unaware of when you're dealing with populations like the ones that you are? For example, what role does intersectionality play in the lives of
Mhm.
your families?
I think with intersectionality, I think one of the most powerful examples is actually looking at someone's immigration status, and looking at how policy, high level policy impacts people's everyday lives. And so, for example, a person who is a government sponsored refugee, many people don't know, but actually after 30 days of arriving in Canada, they have to begin to pay back their transportation and their medical examination loan to the federal government. And it can be upwards of thousands of dollars. And so the Canadian Council of Refugees actually did a really, really great infographic on this issue. And in it, they reported that 50% of people struggled to pay back this loan on top of having to pay for basic needs like food or shelter. And then they also reported that about 76% of their government sponsored refugees spent their social assistance monies paying back this loan, or instead of going to English classes or accessing other supports that would really help support a positive trajectory in resettling in Canada, we're looking for work to pay back this loan.
Mhm.
And so from this one example of a person's immigration status, we can see that it has huge implications on a person's life. And so if we imagine adding the other layers of intersectionality like race, gender, ability, education, it can either generate privilege or deepen hardship and barriers.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a lot. And I remember as we were chatting in preparation for this, you're saying how do you summarize intersectionality in a brief thing? I think you did a good job of like
Oh, thank
some
you.
concrete examples and some numbers, and then adding on those other pieces. And I'm amazed that even 50% of people were able to, or were able to start paying off within 30 days, because that's an amazing turnaround to be settled in a new country, probably from a place of turmoil, and already to be coming back around and starting to pay off loans.
Mhm.
Um, I recalled what I was thinking about earlier, and it was the two other things you dropped: the spectrum and the um, like the range of ways of addressing food insecurity. Why is it important to have a spectrum of food insecurity um, solutions?
Mhm. I think it's important to have a spectrum of food security strategies. For one, because people are very dynamic in their socioeconomic realities. Like some people are at a place in their lives where they really can't afford groceries, regardless of if they're 60 to 30% discount. they just simply cannot afford at this time, because there was a housing research study that was recently done with EMC, led by EMCN in partnership with other immigrant serving organizations. And they actually found in this report, just very quickly, I think it was about over 300 people responded, and over 60% of people were paying 50% or more of their total income on housing or rent. And then some of the unique financial responsibilities that immigrant populations have are things like that transportation loan. That transportation loan isn't always just applicable to only government sponsored. Actually, privately sponsored persons can apply for that loan as well. And so that's important to note. And then there's also remittance payments. So although they're in Canada, back home, they might have family that's still there that are actually struggling even more than the families in Canada. And so it's really important to send finances back to support family. And it's a cultural responsibility, and it's a familial responsibility as well. And so, yes, people are very different in their financial circumstances or their social circumstances. And then secondly, there's existing work happening in the community. There's so many people like yourselves and other organizations working in the area of food security. So how do we work together to have that coordinated response, not to duplicate work, but to really complement and amplify what's happening in the community? So for example, when we're kind of combining the two, I guess, actually, this will be a good plug for us. Don't mind me. There's the cultural grocery box that we're currently exploring through a market research in partnership with Anna Bubo, with Another Way. And so we're really trying to look at families that have varying finances. So with the grocery run, we're really trying to reserve the grocery run for our families that are most socioeconomically vulnerable. And then looking at families that maybe after paying bills, after paying rent, after paying money back home, do they have some money left that we can help leverage through values of community bulk purchasing, through values of mutual care and shared humanity, to be able to collectively purchase and leverage our money to be able to purchase affordable, nutritious, and culturally relevant food. And so those are the key components of that social enterprise. And so looking at families that have diverse socioeconomic circumstances, and then also learning from what exists already in the community. So we're learning from, for example, Food for Good, Good Box to Go. We're learning from We Can. We're learning from yourselves with your Pay What You Can grocery store, soon to come in Calgary and Edmonton. And so we're really trying to learn and not duplicate. How do we improve and how do we leverage what exists in the community already?
Totally. Yeah, there's an amazing number of organizations addressing food insecurity in Edmonton, and I'm sure in every city. And the more conversations we have, the more we learn from each other's mistakes, and the more we collaborate and bring these conversations also into the public. I hope that somebody out there is listening to some of the work that you're doing and being like, wow, that's amazing. Let's try that in our operations. So my hope is that that's definitely the case. As we're talking about like the different aspects that the Multicultural Health Broker does, are there any other misconceptions about what Edmontonians believe the Multicultural Health Brokers is and it is not?
I think there's kind of two major misconceptions about the co-op. And so one of them would be that we serve primarily newcomer populations, but we actually also serve not so newcomers that have been in Canada for like 10 plus years because of systemic inequities that we talked about, like even just simply looking at how a lot of government sponsored refugees are set up in Canada to be in poverty, having to pay such a huge financial responsibility coming to Canada, maybe not speaking the language, not being settled in terms of their education or employment. It has huge implications for somebody. And so people can be basically set up to be in chronic poverty for many, many years. And so it's really important to highlight that, you know, marginalized ethnocultural minority populations are disproportionately impacted by poverty, by high unemployment or underemployment. And so that's really important to highlight. And then secondly, that brokers are simply translators. They're very, very skilled people that have very unique social skills and brokering skills. It's actually a research-based practice, the brokering model. And so to be able to navigate those two worlds and support a family that is resettling, in the process of resettling in Canada, and then also to help shake and move systems, I think it takes a pretty incredible person. So I would most certainly not limit a broker to just simply a translator.
Totally. What does it mean to shake and move the system?
So for example, the grocery run and leftovers and the co-op and what we're doing in general together, we're the knowledge that we're generating through the information that we're finding through our surveying.
Mm,
We're producing all of this really important knowledge that hopefully will impact systems change. When we're revealing what's happening at the community level and revealing the depth and chronicity of food insecurity, how powerful is that? Hopefully that is a very strong and compelling reason to pay people living wages, for a universal basic income, to have healthcare. And so hopefully we can shake and move until we can, achieve those things, because ultimately the work that we're doing together with leftovers and the grocery run, we're simply addressing the symptom of poverty. It's not looking at, the underlying issue, which is related to income.
mm.
And that's another
Totally.
reason why we have to have that spectrum.
Round of
Oh,
applause. Wow, that was like,
okay.
that was very motivating. Now I'm going to have all the energy I need to continue for the next like month of work. That's like, I love that. That like systems change and how the work we do, how you drew the like from the local like research, how the direct that you're actually doing to the local or the greater change. Love that. Very well said and very inspiring. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
absolutely. It's huge systemic issues, and ultimately poverty is the challenge. It's something we touched on briefly with Tamsin last session, was the idea of universal basic income, and I'm curious how that affects newcomers to Canada. And I mean, obviously we don't have it, but I know in speaking with you previously, you expressed challenges with regards to CERB, in that some newcomers may not, they may not be available, that those funds may not be available to them. How do you see that panning out if we were to get universal basic income, for example?
Mhm. So I think if universal basic income were accessible to all populations, like the newcomer population, it would have huge positive impacts on people's lives. And so if people had enough money, they would be able to not worry so much about having a house over their head, or money for food on the table. And so they would be able to focus on a strong trajectory to be successful in resettling in a new country. They would be able to have their attention to going to language classes, going to employment training for more gainful employment, and pursuing higher education, or focusing on healing their mental health. And imagine how powerful that would be, and all the ripple effects that would
Mm-hmm,
result from having your income secure and having those
mm-hmm,
key components of wellness secure.
mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, at this point, I would love to start opening up to questions from our community as well, and the folks who are here. And you can start typing them away in the chat box. Or if you'd like to unmute yourself, raise a hand, that would be lovely too. We'd love to hear your voice. I'll just give a few seconds for those to come in. Fun fact, I have this card over the bottom of my computer screen to keep my eyes away from the chat box, because I'm really bad at multitasking. So if a comment comes up from the chat box normally, I can't see it. But now I've taken it away and gonna keep an eye out for questions. Um, Maybe one other like fun side comment to add. Oh, well, you know what? Hold that thought. And we have a question coming in. How much does this cost on a monthly basis? Um,
The grocery run?
Ali,
Or
yeah, could you expand on what you mean by how much does which cost on a monthly basis? And
I can
before we
maybe
get there,
answer in a few ways. So actually, because we are working so hard to develop really strong relationships with local food producers and retailers, we're actually able to, with the support, of course, with leftovers and the Edmonton Food Bank, augmenting our food. The cost of one hamper for a family for 1 week is $4.60. And so in 1 year for a family, it's actually about $250, which I think is pretty incredible. I think it really speaks to the generosity of our community members that really believe in and support in this work. Um, And then I just think it's a testament to how we're able to leverage community purchasing power and how important it is to tap into that.
Definitely. Yeah, I haven't seen what do you get in a box? Like how much food does it come in a box?
So for example, I'll use last week's grocery run hamper. So we had about 3 to 4 pounds of potatoes, 2 pounds of onions, 2 kilograms of rice. We had 2 pounds of bananas, a bunch of kale. We had chickpea cans in there. We also had tomatoes and other veggies as well. And so we primarily focus on vegetables. It's evading me now, the different items that we have, but I have also this week's contents as well. So we have chickpeas, onions, potatoes, cabbage, bananas, celery, and then maybe some blueberries and peppers as well. And then we also have lentils to distribute this week too.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a lot of food for, what is it, 460?
Yes, $4.60. And so that's
Amazing.
only possible because of the relationships that we've established with vendors, and also because of the support from Leftovers and Edmonton Food Bank too. So it's most certainly a collaborative effort.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Next question from Shada. Can you explain the natural helper's role?
So a natural helper is usually identified by a broker from within the community. So it's a person, maybe a senior or somebody else that maybe has a little bit of time on their hands to support with various things. So it's not just delivering grocery hampers. They might be supporting the co-op in different capacities as well. So it's kind of like another relational agent. So this is a person that will speak the same language as the family and may come from the same ethnocultural community too. And so the reason why this is so important is because there's a lot of fear and distrust within our community from authority figures or from government. And so there was a time where we were actually trying to reach the Sudanese community. And because of some of the really horrific things that have happened historically, there is really deep fear for sharing information, even if it's just something that we might think is very normal to share in every day, whether that's a phone number or an address. It was actually really difficult to reach these families. And so the relationship that the broker has developed over time is really key to make sure we can reach these families and support them.
Could you, I'm stealing back questions, but can you elaborate on like who the broker is? Is that an existing community member, and how do they get involved with the co-op? And are they solely a member or an employee of the co-op, or how does that plan out?
Yes, so a broker is an employee with the Multicultural Health Brokers. So they're like a trained community health worker that is like the person with the relationship with the community member. And so when the co-op first began, it was actually 14 women that were natural leaders within the community that formed the co-op. And so it's almost like a ripple effect of that, in that natural leaders or people within the community have been identified and become connected to the co-op and undergo some training. But really what's most important is that they have connections and deep understanding of issues within the community.
Yeah, totally. Okay, next question here. When you put together the food hampers from given food by leftovers, how do you compose them in terms of proteins, carbs, vegetables? And what happens with food that doesn't work with the hampers?
So each week when we're doing the purchasing, for example, I'll always try to keep in mind what we've received through leftovers or through the Edmonton Food Bank, just to make sure that we are purchasing enough. And so some days when the donations are particularly low, we'll have to purchase more just to make sure that there's an adequate volume in the hampers. And then we always try to make sure there's always a carb. And so whether that's lentils, chickpeas, dried kidney beans, or rice, we always make sure that that component is taken care of. And lucky for us, lentils are an excellent source of protein. And so that's one really easily logistical way of getting families protein, because we have very, very limited infrastructure in the grocery run. So I think we have a total of maybe like 4.5 fridges. I say half because one is generously given to us by EIC, and they put up with us always filling it with eggs or yogurt. And so we're really grateful to them as well. But we're really trying to be mindful of making sure that each family is accounted for. And so we use like an assembly line style. And with COVID, it's become particularly tricky with trying to assemble the hampers. because the nature of this work, you're working together with other people. And so trying to make sure that people have sufficient PPE and things like that, but also like when we're purchasing food from our vendors, we're getting it in large cases, like very high volumes. And so we're having to work directly with people to lift like 50-pound bags of potatoes or onions and things like that. And so we use an assembly line model to try to limit the traffic in and between people. And then I think the second part of that question was what happens with food that doesn't work. Was that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, so we do two things with that. One is to put it into our pantry section where our brokers will come in and be able to pick on behalf of their families that they serve because they're most familiar with what their families could most benefit from. And then we also have that set up with leftovers for any food items that we don't use, particularly prepared meals. Those are really good because we're located in downtown Macaulay. So we have a lot of community members come through the alleyway, as well as just like in and around the building, who will see kind of what we're doing and come take a peek and ask us what's going on. And they'll see that we have food. And so sometimes we'll get some impromptu requests. And so those are really great to be able to share with the community as well.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and to elaborate on what you were saying there, for those who don't know, the Multicultural Health Brokers is the only agency that we work with at Leftovers that also is a donor. So we have 5 maybe donations going out to the Multicultural Health Brokers each week. And if there's foods that don't work in the hampers, we have a pickup at the end of the week where one of our volunteers will come by, pick up all that food, and take it to iHuman. And they can make use of whatever the Multicultural Health Brokers can't. And my understanding is it's mostly the prepared foods or like specialty like hummus, which I think is fantastic for iHuman to hand out for folks coming through their organization.
And maybe now is a good time to let you know too, we've actually been sharing some of the food donations through a more informal network. And so we're also part of the John Humphrey Center's YEG COVID response that they've created on Facebook. And so we've actually developed another network on there to connect any grassroots food response initiatives with any excess food that we have. So any extra hampers that we have or any food that we were unable to distribute, because I've been to iHuman before and we've shared some of the food there, and some of the produce items they aren't able to take. So trying to make sure that it indeed goes to families, even if we've already topped up kind of all of our hampers or included like additional items, but they're like, I think for example, there was a couple pallets of bananas that we received from the food bank.
Mm.
And so we shared it with leftovers, we shared it with our networks, but it was just so much bananas. And so how do we, make sure that we aren't wasting it? And it was such a time sensitive item too. That was definitely a challenge, but it was really trying to reach into how do we develop that infrastructure for excess food after we've already distributed too. So it's good to have that system.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. There's a couple of comments that I just was able to pay attention to and read at the same time, which high five to me. And but yeah, saying how inspiring you are, and I'll agree with
Oh,
that.
thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Um, yeah, next question. What are some of the biggest challenges the grocery run faces and in serving 500 families a month? Is it funding, staff resources? I know you at one point you were looking for a new space. What are your biggest challenges?
Yes, so we've learned at the grocery run that probably the most difficult component of this work is that food response is like a giant game of logistics. And so, particularly because we are working to connect families with fresh produce, it's really time sensitive because of our limited infrastructure. It limits what we can purchase. So, for example, a lot of families have been asking for spinach, kind of more those delicate leafy items, which we would really love to distribute, but we don't have the refrigeration space for it. And especially winter was good for us, maybe bad for other people, but because it was so cool, it was a lot easier to store and we didn't have to worry so much about the summer heat and it's spoiling the food that we're distributing to our families. And so space and infrastructure is most certainly one of our biggest challenges. But I think because the scale that we're currently operating at, it's really difficult to sustain. And then with the challenges of food rescue and food donations and kind of the uncertainty and unpredictability of it, it makes it really difficult to rely solely on food donations. And it also compromises food dignity and our ability to honor somebody and what they should have access to, as food is a fundamental human right. And so it really makes it difficult in that regard. But I think leaning into the grocery run and our wish to be more oriented in the relationships that we've developed in the community, we really hope to pursue people-to-people solutions. So when we talked about it costs $4.60 for us to procure one of these food hampers, that's a coffee for maybe one of us, you know? And
Yeah.
so if we're able to leverage $250, a one-time donation of $250 from 600 people, that's 1 year of food purchasing taken care of for, you know, over 550 families. Isn't that powerful? And
Mm,
so, you know, it really shows that it doesn't take a whole lot of people to make a huge impact. And so never underestimate what you can contribute back to the community. Never underestimate your contribution. It goes a long, long ways.
mm, amazing. Especially when you have really, really hardworking people like yourself on the other end of it.
Oh, thank you. I don't do it by myself. There is actually a wonderful team of ladies from the U of A Alumni Association that are like the OGs of the grocery run. They have been with us since 2013. And so they really are the backbone of the grocery run, and good people know good people. They've added so many important people to our team. And so we're really deeply grateful. And for yourself too, Garnet, you're part of the reason why Leftovers has scaled up 3 times. So
Thanks.
don't say that I'm the only hardworking person. You're most certainly one of them.
Thanks, Julia. Um, I'm curious how many people work for the grocery run, and are they all members of the cooperative? Is that how it works?
So I'm actually the only full-time staff for the grocery run program. We have two wonderful colleagues, well, three actually, three wonderful colleagues, Colin, Logan, and Devinder, who support the grocery run primarily with frontline operations. But we also have the Persimmon Project colleagues who are funded through the United Way, who unfortunately their positions will be ending soon just because of the ongoing challenges with funding. And so unfortunately we will be in a difficult position with human resource and to continue the momentum of this work. But we have really good people alongside of us, and they are not brokers, but they are our colleagues at the co-op. A little bit
Yeah,
difficult, I guess, to explain.
yeah, yeah. Awesome. Um, Next question from I'm apologize. I may not get the name pronunciation right. Elaine. Is manpower involved in all volunteer based, or so is it how much of your efforts are volunteer based, how much of it is staff based? I'm interpreting that question. I'm hoping that's correct.
Mhm. I would most certainly say almost 90% is volunteer operated. And so that 10% is probably Colin, Logan, Devinder, and myself lugging product from one space to another. That's the staffing part, and then I guess the coordination of it would be that 10% as well. But most certainly, we have about 60 volunteers that help us to prepare those hampers, process the donations, and also deliver it. And that is really the legwork of the grocery run program. Without those 60 incredible community members, the grocery run would not be possible.
Yeah. And I think that answers a question that Kathy had as well, that the volunteers who distribute your food are grocery run volunteers separate from the leftovers volunteers.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
Are you looking for more volunteers?
We most certainly are. And so if you'd like to volunteer, I can put my contact information in the chat, or perhaps Garnet, you could share it in maybe like an email blast or something like that. But we can most certainly have people join us preparing the food hampers, but delivery is also a challenge as well. And I think it's because we do ask quite a bit of our volunteer drivers, just because of the nature of this work and the sensitive information that we're handling. We do ask for a 2-month commitment, just so that we can keep things as consistent as possible.
Yeah. Awesome. We have an awesome community of leftovers volunteers, and I see that a few of them at least are on this call. And if speaking to you out there, if you happen to volunteer with the grocery run instead, that is okay with me. I'm sure you'll
Oh
come back
yes,
to
we don't want
leftovers
to
at
poach
some
your
point,
volunteers.
and we'll have us covered. We got a community behind us. We're good.
Thank you,
I'd
Garnet.
love to ask a little more specifically. We have I love the idea of like crowdsourcing our problems and our challenges. If the grocery run were to ask for, 2 or 3 things, be it like we need a space, we need funding, we need volunteers, what are like your top asks from,
Mhm.
or your biggest barriers to meeting the needs of your community?
I think for me personally, the biggest priority is to secure funds for food purchasing for the grocery run program. And so what that really looks like in 1 year is about $150,000, which at that high level, it seems huge, but please everyone remember when we break down those numbers, that's about $250 a year for a family. And so we work incredibly hard to stretch your donated dollars. We don't waste them. We make sure that each potato and each onion goes into a bag and goes to a family. And we are really careful with how we spend the monies.
Mhm.
And so it's really breaking down those numbers like that to something that's a little bit more palatable, excuse the pun.
Yeah, nice.
$250 from about 600 people, and that's really what we're looking for. And I strongly believe deeply in my heart that that's possible, that 600 good-hearted, community-minded, caring Edmontonians could afford $250. So if you know 600 people, please connect them to us.
Well, I know one good person is already asking what, what would a check be made out to if they want to provide funds to the. So you know what? If we could get that information from you afterwards, we'll send that out in our follow-up email, and then anybody who wants to help out the grocery run can do so. 'Cause I'd
Amazing. Thank you
be
so much.
fantastic.
Thank you,
Um,
everyone.
Jamie's is our Facebook group moderator. Thanks, Jamie's, and has a couple of questions. The first one is, what are the cultural foods that the Multicultural Health Brokers distribute? When you talk about culturally relevant foods, what are they?
Yeah, so that's when I talk a little bit about the cultural degree that we're pursuing and advancing. Um, I think it's more kind of pushing back a bit against traditional food items that are usually given out through food assistance programs, which are usually convenience items because it's easier to process and handle. It's not time sensitive, it's not temperature sensitive,
Mhm,
and so there's often a lot of canned goods or like processed boxed items like hamburger helper that can be distributed in mainstream food assistance programs that our families don't know how to use and do not want to throw away. And so just like it might have collected in the back of your pantry, it might also collect in the back of our family's pantry as well. And so we really try to focus on fruits and vegetables, which our families can cook and turn into their cultural meals. And so through our community engagement and broker engagement, we're really trying to collect a really extensive list of different food items that are enjoyed and consumed by the many different ethnocultural communities that we serve through the grocery run. So I think there's actually about 23 to 25 different communities that we serve in the grocery run. So sometimes it can be really difficult to find the sweet spot without repeating the exact same item over and over again.
mhm,
But that's also where our role comes in trying to build on the capacity and knowledge of families to share recipes and to generate collective knowledge. And so that's really important. But some key items have been trying to secure items like lentils, red split lentils, green lentils, chickpeas, dried beans, crushed tomato sauce. Some of these things might not sound so like culturally relevant or culturally specific, but it's really trying to find items that are most essential and most helpful to the families, I think is what is most um, unique about our program, and that we're trying to be as responsive as possible.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and they also strike me as raw ingredients, which then they use
Yes.
in their cultural recipes.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Um, Next question here. How do you prioritize the food insecurity needs of the community? Um, Prioritize the food insecurity needs of the community for multicultural health brokers. Do you understand? I'm not sure if I quite understand what you mean, Jamie's. But if you
Right.
could, maybe you could try on that one, Julia.
Sure, I can try that question. So food security is most definitely an emerging priority among the brokers and what they're seeing. So through their frontline everyday work, talking with families, engaging with the families, whether that's through other areas of wellness, food insecurity is something that's really dangerous and that it can be hidden. There's a lot of shame that not just the newcomer community experiences, but in not having the financial resources to be able to provide food for your family, there's so many feelings of shame tied to that. How do we leverage that relationship that we have with the community to make them feel comfortable to be able to share? And so that's one way that it's kind of emerged, but also just logically makes a lot of sense when a family, is paying 75 to 100% of their income on housing. How could there be enough money for food? How could there be enough money for simply transportation? So it's a very almost like logical next step. So housing insecurity and food insecurity are most certainly very, very tied, and brokers have picked up that it's really, really important at this time to make sure that we are keeping families housed and also fed and well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it strikes me that you're meeting the essential needs and then also doing it in a way that is culturally sensitive and and holistic at the same time.
Right.
Not just okay, you're hungry, we'll give you lots of bread, but really trying to go beyond that and be sensitive and appropriate in the way you address those issues.
Because it's in saying that culturally relevant or honoring food is important, it's important for everybody in that you can't just give somebody a loaf of bread and say, that box is checked, that this person has something to fill their stomach. If
Hmm.
you eat bread or ramen noodles or processed foods consistently over time, there are severe health implications. So in that way,
Hmm.
food can really be a preventative health measure. It contributes and can exacerbate or trigger new health conditions. And so what are the additional costs that families are incurring by compromising their food?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, would love to see like healthy food be a base human right for everybody. Just whatever food is going to make you the healthiest person that you can be, let's get that to the people.
Mhm.
Would love to see that. We are at 7 o'clock, and I'm going to steal the last question back from myself. And we've heard a ton of passion from you tonight, Julia.
Thank
And
you.
I'm wondering, where does this come from? Why do you care? Like, what drives you?
Um, I think it's understanding that food is much more than just food. It's not about just filling your stomach. It's connected to so many different parts of us. Oftentimes when we're sad or when we are happy, we want to go out and celebrate with something delicious to eat with people that we love, or when someone is sick, or however, we want to show our love through food. We want to cook them a meal. Some of our fondest memories with people that we love is in the kitchen or out on the farm or somewhere, and it's related to food. There's so many different components to it. And so how do we really leverage that, and how beautiful and powerful would it be if we were to change our perception of food as just a resource that's always scarce, but there's so much richness in it? How do we
Mhm.
really hang on to that and dig in our heels and to see the value of food and see and link it with the value of humans and their right to food and their dignity in food? And yeah, I just think that that's kind of the ongoing theme that has emerged in learning from the families, and that most certainly doesn't come from me. It comes from the community. They're the ones to articulate that. They're the ones to show us that we have wealth, we have knowledge, we have dignity.
Mm. Mm. Amazing, very inspiring. Yeah, I can't add anything to that. With that, we'll start to close our evening. Thank you so much, Julia. It's been very informative. I'm in this stuff on the day to day to some extent, not as deep as you are, and I've learned so much to the extent that my brain is full and I'm barely speaking at this point. And I'm sure that everybody else there has learned a lot as well. And um, yeah, just it's very greatly appreciative.
Thank
Uh,
you so much,
Folks,
Garnet.
stay
You're,
tuned
you're
for our.
underestimating yourself. My heart is full too, and I really appreciate this opportunity. And you're always such a great person to talk to. And you work really hard and put up with all my antics. The building hours have changed. This has changed. We have no one to pick up. And so you're one of the most nimble people that I know. And that takes a lot and is exactly what's needed in the sector. And so we really, really appreciate all that you do, all that Leftovers does for the co-op and the grocery run. We're really grateful.
Thanks, Julia. Appreciate that. Yeah. And also on that note, I mentioned this at the end of the last webinar, but I'm the face that you see on the screen, but I'm not Leftovers. There was a bunch of Leftovers teammates on the call right now, and a lot of them are actively supporting me in this process. And there's a lot of resources and people who contribute to Leftovers, as well as our fantastic volunteers. And I hope that one or two of our donors joined. I invited them because I knew that they'd love to see where their food goes as well. So yeah, very appreciative for the community and the network and the passion of our people. Our next webinar is, I don't have the date in my head right now, but that'll be coming out in our email afterwards. And we are discussing food waste with the city of Edmonton. So very much looking forward to that. Very different perspective to today. And it's also going to be a very fruitful and engaging discussion. So hope you will join us then. And until then, I will say adios, folks. And as felt good last time, I think I will play some accordion music to bring us out of the evening. That's all you get. Ciao, folks. Have a great evening.